Let us start by chanting Namo Tassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. So today we are moving forward with the Arupa Chittas, or the Arupa consciousnesses, the Arupa absorptions, the immaterial absorptions. Something that I must mention before we move ahead in the class is with regards to the Arupa Jhana, the amount of information available to us regarding these jhanas, the subtle practice required of this jhana is we do not have enough resources regarding this sector of this subsect of absorption. Probably because it is such a fine, subtle difference between each and every one of these jhanas that it is also very, very difficult to put it down onto words, right? The in terms of material, the material that we would usually refer to with regards to these absorptions would be, even with regards to the jhanas, would be the Vishuddhimagga, right? Vishuddhimagga. There is material also available within the Hindu study, which we will not be going into, but sort of dwelling deep into the Arupa jhanas with the amount of information that is available regarding these Arupa jhanas is a very hectic task. So when it comes to, I remember when I used to study at university, even before university, when I had done Abhidhamma with a couple of teachers even before university, um, the amount of information that you are getting is much, much, much more than the information that we got, right? We would just basically, we would touch on, okay, Akasana and Chayatana, this is the object, this is the object, these are the three classes of the consciousnesses, the karma developing consciousness, which is the initial consciousness that you would attain, and then the rebirth linking consciousness category, which is the resultant, and then the consciousness types, that the functional consciousnesses, that the arahant. So that was basically the information that we also received, right? So whatever that you are receiving now is far more information than what we received when we were discussing, because I'm trying to dig as much as I can and mix up different sutras and Abhidhamma points to deliver this. But at this point, the information that we require regarding the Arupa jhanas is at a minimum. But I'm trying to sort of dig and get as much information together as much as we can. So up until this category of Abhidhamma, or this category of consciousness, please know, it might be a little bit difficult to perceive because these are very subtle natures, right? Now, just to recap, we've gone through the Arupa jhanas. I'm sorry, we've gone through the Arupa consciousnesses, or the immaterial consciousnesses. We've then gone into the first Arupa, or the immaterial absorption, which uh, which was which was the Akasana and Chayatana, which was the base of infinite space, right? Akasa, space. Sometimes I think a point that I forgot to mention the other day was, now when we say the base of infinite space, it is not in any way to relate to the infinite space of the world. It is to relate to the infinite. The other word that is used is boundless. And the reason that they use the word boundless is because when we sometimes talk of it as the base of infinite space, some people sort of think about it, or understand it in a way that we are focusing on the infinite nature of space all around us, That is not so. What we are focusing on is the infinite nature of the boundlessness of the mind, right? The boundlessness of the mind. That is what we specifically refer to. And that is also the reason why we stretch out or sort of spread the object, the acquired sign, in all directions of the mind, and then we perceive of the space to get rid of the material object of the fifth jhana of the fine material jhana absorption. Right? I hope that is understood. That is the reason why we spread out this material um, acquired absorption, so that when then we have an object to perceive. Now, before we move on to Vijnana and Chayatana, it is important to understand now the object of Akasa. I mentioned this is a concept of mind. And being a concept of mind, it would be much, much more subtle than the consciousness, than a consciousness, than an object based from a fine material attribute. That is to do with the rupa plane, right? So this object or the concept that we have, the concept of akasa or space, you hold on to that. Now, for example, if you're thinking of a memory, if you're reminiscing about a memory, now that memory is not physical, it is a memory, it is a consciousness, and you hold that consciousness, that memory, that image together with the consciousness. It is a process of consciousness. Now today you will, as we dwell into the rest of the three uh, uh, immaterial absorptions, understand that from now we've come from a place of material, and then holding on to that material is a consciousness, right? We get rid of the material and we focus on the space, on the space attribute of that. And then now we are going into a more subtle form from each immaterial absorption that we transcend by, right? So we are journeying into a more subtle state of mind, which at this time can also be a little bit difficult to understand how subtle it is, because it is such a far-fetched idea to us, right? Which is such a far-fetched idea to us because we've not experienced such a subtle state of consciousness or mind, right? Starting with that, now let us go into Vijnana and Chayatan, page number 62 on the compendium of Comprehensive Manual of Abhidhamma. On the Comprehensive Manual of Abhidhamma. Right. Before we move on, I think it would be healthy to read through the first base of infinite space before we move on to the second. So let's just read through it. The first of the four immaterial jhanas is the attainment of the base of infinite space. To reach this, a meditator who has mastered the fifth fine material jhana based on a kasina object spreads out its counterpart sign of the kasina until it becomes immeasurable in extent. Then he removes the kasina by attending only to the space it pervaded, contemplating it as infinite space. Now, the word infinite again is used because the counterpart sign has been spread all across any sort of boundary that we can see in the mind. We've spread it out all across, right? And that is why we refer to it as infinite. So sometimes we also now, I think, with regards to many of the later translations, we find the word boundless. As I mentioned, we find the word more than infinite. We find the word boundless space, right? That is why. Now, through repeated attention, given in this way. Now, when we say repeated attention, always remember that this repeated attention is vitakka and vichara, right? This repeated attention is vitakka and vichara. Given in this way, there eventually arises in absorption a chitta having as object the concept of infinite space, akasa panyati, right? So which is a concept, the concept of space. The expression base of infinite space, strictly speaking, refers to the concept of infinite, strictly speaking. Right? The expression base of infinite space, strictly speaking, refers to the concept of infinite space, which serves as the object of the first immaterial sense, uh, immaterial sphere consciousness. Here, the word ayatana, base, has the sense of habitat or dwelling of the chitta of the jhana. That is what it says there. What that means is that it is a consciousness that dwells as the object. But now at this stage, at the first stage of the arupa or the immaterial absorptions, we do not take that into mind, but it's giving us a point of information to know that this is a consciousness, right? This is a consciousness dwelling for the chitta of the jhana. However, it is derivative. In a derivative sense, the expression base of infinite space is also extended to the jhana itself, right? So although it is a consciousness, it is not seen separate from the jhana itself. The jhana itself is that pervading consciousness, right? Now, moving on to the base of infinite consciousness, Vinyanan Chayatana. Vinyanan Chayatana. Vinyanan Chayatana. Now, the base of infinite consciousness, Vinyanan Chayatana. The consciousness that is here said to be infinite in consciousness of the first immaterial absorption. Now, how this happens, okay, let's continue reading. Since that first immaterial absorption has as its object the base or concept of infinite space, this implies that the consciousness which pervades that space, right? The consciousness that pervades that space, as its object, also partakes in its infinity, the boundlessness of that consciousness which pervades. To reach this attainment, therefore, the meditator takes as object the consciousness of the base of infinite space and contemplates it as infinite consciousness until the second immaterial absorption arises. Now, in a similar fashion to the Rupa jhanas and the progressing of the Rupa jhanas, a meditator who has reached such a state would have um, find a certain gross factor within the base of infinite space. Now, the gross factor here is that the consciousness pervades in a way that it's holding on to panyakti, the akasa panyakti, the concept of space, right? The concept, so the mind is sort of now holding on to this concept, which allows us to, or rather, which allows us to sort of meditate on this to be able to develop the conscious, the absorption, which here is a finer object than the Rupa objects that we've been using in the past. Now, what we focus on, now, if you take my hand as a consciousness which pervades this object, right? Now, what we are focusing on is we forget this part. We forget this part and we are focusing on this now, right? Now, this consciousness which holds on to, I think in a very similar way, we realize or we are able to feel a very, not, I wouldn't say very similar, but a similar case when we practice Chittanupassana, right? For example, we are thinking of, let's say, we are reminiscing of a happy instance, a happy moment, maybe. It just appears in the mind, emotion appears in the mind. And now we are watching this Chittanupasana. The watching, the sati, we see the sati, and then we see this object like a play unfolding in front of us. But we are also aware that we are aware. That awareness, right? That awareness comes from this consciousness. And then when we are able to progress, we forget about the play, and we now, when we have sati arising, we forget about this play of emotions or whatever which is unfolding in our mind. And now you know, okay, I am aware of this, right? Maybe this is an experience that some of you can relate to. I'm sure most of you can relate to this, right? Where we are aware that we are aware, right? And that awareness comes from this sati consciousness that is absorbing, being aware of whatever emotions that are happening, arising in our minds. Arising in our minds. In Vijnana Chayatana, so what we then, as I've just mentioned, we don't focus on this object of space. We focus on this mind, which is holding on to this concept, which allows for the jhana to appear. So the danger that we see here is a concept itself. That we are using a concept, a created panyapti, to realize a jhana. That is the connection. Because of this connection it has with the concept, we try to now eradicate that feeble nature that we have bound ourselves by. So then we go on to the consciousness in Vijnana Chayatana. So how does the contemplation then become? We contemplate Vijnana, 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 or Chitta, 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 the consciousness, right? The consciousness. That is what we focus on. And in a similar way, when this balance is with the arising of samadhi, with the suppressing of the hindrances, again, it is mentioned in the Visuddhimagga, the arising of concentration and the suppressing of the hindrances. Even at this level, there is furthermore, it is mentioned now, when we attain the 5 rupa jhanas or the material jhanas, we sometimes, I've mentioned before, sometimes meditators imagine or think that they have attained nibbana or a saintly state because the hindrances are so suppressed. You're so peaceful. Even when you're out of the jhana and doing your gardening or your work, you feel a sense of enlightenment in a Western sense. A sense of enlightenment in a Western sense, right? You feel a lightness of mind, attraction to good, wholesome natures. Why? Because the hindrances are suppressed. So you can imagine to even go above that for the Visuddhimagga to use the word with the arising of further samadhi and the suppressing of the hindrances. Further, one is able to now distinctly see a differentiation between the object, the concept the mind holds on to, and the mind. This differentiation. Then focusing on this mind as consciousness, vijnana, vijnana, or chitta, 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 one is able to now attain a jhana by having this chitta as its object. That is Vijnana Chayatana. That is Vijnana Chayatana. Now, at this point, nothing exists. Now, for example, you might also remember when I guided you, if you have participated in our meditation classes on Saturday and Sunday, in certain instances, I've said this. What have I said? I've said, imagine that there are only 2 entities in this world, the breath and the mind that observes the breath. The breath and the mind that observes. This is actually a tip that Abhidhamma Hamdro, that now in a Venerable, Most Venerable, now in a Abhidhamma Hamdro advised us by. Imagine that there is the breath, which is this breath, and the mind that observes the breath, and everything else disappears. Nothing else exists. Your problems, your whatever duties, nothing else exists. Only the breath and the mind that observes the breath. right? And the mind that observes the breath. So in your mind, the image that should be created is a triangular image, right? The base of the triangle, a triangular image, the base of the triangle being the consciousness that observes, and the tip of the triangle being the breath, right? This image is important because it is in a way to sort of hint at one pointedness, right? So that is also, so that is another tip that we've not discussed about the language of meditation, guided meditation, but we've not discussed the language of guided meditation, but that is the image that one should have. Try it out and let me know how it helps you in your practice. But I know with personal experience and of course discussing with my brothers, meaning monks, we have found it to be a very, very, very impressive technique to use, which brings very fast development as well, right? Now, moving on to Akinchanyayatana, right? Akinchanyayatana. Now, the base of nothingness. Let's read page number 63 for anyone who is joining. The third immaterial attainment has as its object the present non-existence, the present non-existence, voidness, or secluded aspect of the consciousness, pertaining to the base of infinite space. By giving attention to the absence of that consciousness, the third immaterial absorption arises, taking as its object the concept of non-existence or nothingness. Natti bhava panyati. In respect of the fifth immaterial, the first immaterial consciousness. Now, what this is, now the base, now do not misunderstand, the consciousness is always there, right? The consciousness is always there, but at this point, the consciousness is a very subtle entity, right? Is a very subtle entity. Now, if I am to use my hand again, right? We've had the base of space here. We've had the base of space. We've had the consciousness associating this base of space for the first jhana. For the second jhana, we focused on this, the consciousness. Now we remove the application of consciousness itself, right? We remove the application. So you can imagine how in Pali we call it tikka panya, right? Tikka panya, Panna, tikka panya. That is a sort of a very refined sense of penetrative attention, right? A refined sense that creates a refined sense of penetrative attention, and that is the amount to which we have so much, that is the amount to which our minds are refined at this point, refined at this point. The base of nothingness then is, imagine now this consciousness being there, right? Imagine this consciousness being there and think of your Chittanupassana. Your consciousness is here, your consciousness is here, and now you do not have this object, this base of space, and this consciousness, you've been now focusing on the awareness or the consciousness that held this object together. Now this object of space is missing, and now you have this consciousness as a base of Vinyanan Chayatan, or the second immaterial jhana absorption. Now what you're focusing on is, with the focus, you might sometimes in Chittanupassana again, you might have noticed when time itself disappears, right? Like you don't know, right? Sometimes you meditated for 15 minutes, it seems like just a second, or it seems like just a minute, it seems like you've just started, right? Now an experience such as that, where everything just disappears, right? Disappears in a way, of course, how we mundane people would understand. In a way, it would disappear. Now, just imagine, now there is no consciousness. There is a consciousness, but it seems as if there is no consciousness operating. There is no adversion. So just imagine, for us to be able to develop that amount of vitakka vichara in such a subtle, concentrated manner, right? That is what we are aiming at. And now this consciousness will held on to this disappears. That is how the base of nothingness. So we are coming a step closer to the base by which consciousness operates, if you understand what I mean. Closer to home in a way, right? And to that, yeah, and to the way that this consciousness, this process of adversion operates. Then that is what we take as akinchanya yatana, right? Here we can use the words nothingness, nati, 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 again and again, adverting in that way. But just remember, with adverting in a way of nothingness. That is very difficult to say, because we are saying adverting and then we are saying there's no that there is nothing also. It is a very, very subtle state, right? Moving on, then we have the base of neva sanya na sanya yatana, right? Let's read. The base of neither perception nor non-perception. Page number 63 to anyone who has joined new. Page number 63. This fourth and final immaterial attainment is so called because it cannot be said either to include perception nor or to exclude perception. In this type of consciousness, the fact of perception, sanya, has become so subtle that it can no longer perform the decisive function of perception. Let's read that again. In this type of consciousness, the fact of perception, sanya, the fact of perception, sanya, has become so subtle that it can no longer perform the decisive function of perception. And thus, this state cannot be said to have perception, yet to have perception cannot be said to have perception. Yet perception is not altogether absent, but remains in a residual form. Right? Now that is the part that we are focusing on. Thus, it cannot be said not to have perception, although perception alone is mentioned. All the other mental constituents in this chitta also exist in a state of such extreme subtlety that they cannot be described as either existent or non-existent. This fourth immaterial absorption takes as its object the consciousness of the base of nothingness, the third immaterial absorption. Right? Now, relating to that, when this, again, going back to that example in Chittanupassana, when everything just disappears and you go into a state of absolute calm, bliss, subtlety, right? Where everything disappears, even the mind seems to not exist. And now what you are doing is you are aware of that fact, you are aware of that position of perception, right? You are aware of the position of perception, and also the meditation is going on, if you get what I mean there. Now, for example, let's go to the Chittanupassana example. What I mentioned to anyone who has joined new, when we practice Chittanupassana, some of you might have experienced states such as this already, where time disappears, form disappears, and even the mind seems to have disappeared. When the meditation is over and you wake up, or rather not wake up, but rather open your eyes, then you sort of imagine, did I meditate for so long? But you look at your phone, you look at the time, 30 minutes have passed, or an hour has passed, or even more. But you did not feel it at all. But imagine the moment that you become aware of that state, you seem to somehow come out of that deep state to now being aware of the mind as a past object. Let me repeat that again. When you initially in the Chittanupassana, when you are in that state, and let us imagine that you become aware of this calm bliss and the disappearing of form and all consciousness, and seemingly a base of a seemingly a position of nothingness. But when you start to be aware, our perception is not subtle. So what happens is, the moment that you are aware, you seem to have come from that subtle state of experience to a more gross level of experience, right? And now the experience that you are experiencing seems to be an experience of the past, where now you are reminiscing that experience that you've had moments ago. Can I have a thumbs up if you understand what I mean? Yeah. Can I have a thumbs up, guys? Have you gone into a state of nothingness? I don't see any thumbs. Have you all disappeared into a state of nothingness? Can I have some? So no one has understood, except Veera. No one has understood, right? All right. So I'll repeat that again. Now imagine a state. Now let's talk about Anapanasati. Right? Let's talk about Anapanasati. And in a state of Anapanasati, in a state of, when we practice Anapanasati, you have the breath, you're observing the breath, the involuntary breath, the proper breath. You're observing the involuntary breath, the proper breath. And then moments later, you experience that the breath, somehow you were experiencing it, you've been working with it, you've been observing it, and the breath disappears. The breath disappears because now the breath that you were breathing, the sensation, the mind unifies with this experience, right? So you're still breathing. You're still breathing, very much breathing. That's keeping you alive. But because the mind has unified with the sensation of the breath seems to have disappeared. And with the breath and the disappearing and the mind having unified with this experience at the tip of the nose, you feel like everything else has disappeared. Right? You feel like everything else has disappeared. Now, can I have a thumbs up if you understand up to that point? Please use the emojis. Hemwali, Lettuce, Pushpa, Buddhika, where are y'all? No, use the clap emoji if you have not understood that. Okay, so I think most of you all have understood that. Yeah, okay. Some of you all are using the hand raised. Okay. Dil, do you have a question?
No.
Okay. Now, then we have understood that up to that point, right? The mind becomes the experience of the breath itself because it unifies with this experience, and then everything else seems to disappear. The body also disappears, and you're in a state of nothingness, almost. Not in a state of nothingness, but it feels as a state of nothingness, right? We've got that. Now, when you're in that experience of anapana, right? Now let us say at one moment suddenly you awaken to the fact that you are not experiencing anything. Yeah? Do we understand that? Again, thumbs up. We awaken to the fact that we have just experienced a state of nothingness. Oh, all right. So we've understood, right? Now, when we awaken to the fact that we have just experienced a sense of nothingness, it seems as we have come out of that subtle experience that we were just in, isn't it? Because it somehow seems to be a more grosser, a more sort of harder, a more sort of grosser experience now as the perception arises, or the perception or the perceival of that experience arises. That's the word to use, the perceival of the experience that you were experiencing, that nothingness like feel arises. So when that the perception arises, oh, look at this state, it's such a beautiful state. Now the mind has, now if the mind was here, if we take, for example, if the mind was here in a state of absolute calm, the moment that you perceive, what happens is somehow it comes down and you feel that. Like now this experience is something that has passed and you're here now, right? And you sometimes wonder, oh, why did I have to come out of there? Let me try to go back in there. Right? We sometimes try to do that as well. Why did I come out of that? Let me experience that again, right? So you do that. Now that is a perception. Now that is the same thing, similar here, but what happens is when you are able to perceive, the meditation level does not come down anymore. Do you understand? Right? Now at that moment, when we try to experience this experience, or rather when our perception arose, the power of perception arose, now our meditation sort of seems to sort of come down a bit, because, and then the object, the peace, serenity, the nothingness that you experience here seems to be something of the past, like moments ago, seconds ago, right? Seconds ago, milliseconds ago, right? So it's in the object of the past, right? So now this, that happened because of this perception arising to what you were experiencing, right? Because this perception arose, you were not able to balance the perception with this experience. So the moment the mind became a little bit more aware of this experience you were having, the meditation falls, right? Now here in this jhana, you are able to perceive this subtle experience. So imagine how subtle the mind is at this point, and how balanced you are, to maintain the perception and maintain this nothingness here. That is what we are talking about, right? Now, can I have a show of, if if you understood up to that point, can I have a thumbs up? So Dharma, Noeline, Hemali. All right. So I guess most of you understood that, right? Most of you understood that. Lettuce, do you have a question? All right. Now that is a state, that is a very similar state to what this is. So there is, now it is perception that we are talking about. This is perception that we are talking about. And it is a subtle state where now the mind, this perception arises. And now this is perception, and this is this experience of nothingness. So it is there. And this perception, this experience, right? It being together. And the mind is observing this with the perception. And so, right, with the perception and the experience still intact. Right? So it is a base of where the mind is able to experience both of these clusters of perception, and this, the object, the not the object, but the experience of that subtle state, where you now know the perception is at such a subtle level that you, at such a subtle level that you know, that you are able to now advert to this fact and attain the jhana through that, right? This is such a subtle state of perception. You're aware, yet it seems as you're not aware, right? You're aware, but it's so know it as a very, very, very subtle state. So we are going closer to the mind itself, where the mind observes an object, right? Where the mind observes the object, but the object itself is so subtle, right? But the object itself is so subtle because it's nothingness. And we've come into this position of neva sanya, na sanya, yatana from the base of nothingness itself, right? From the base. So you can imagine how subtle this frame of mind at this moment is, right? And this is a state, that is why upekkha, equanimity, is such an important attribute here, right? Is such an important attribute here. Now that is, now that is, now that is the base of neither perception nor non-perception, right? It might seem like a far-fetched idea at the moment. Of course it is, because we have not developed into that stage, right? But no, with try to relate it to your own anapana practice, or your it could also be your Vedananupasana practice, right? The contemplation of chitta, consciousness. It can also be the contemplation of dhammas. It can also be, it can be any of the satipatthanas that you can relate it to, because we do have similar experiences even at this level. But the thing is, the moment we are unable to balance our perception, our minds in a manner that we can be aware of the object yet not be aware, or rather be aware of the object and not have the object fall away, right? Because now the moment, it's like you, the battle that we have in being attempting to observe the involuntary breath. You want to observe the involuntary breath, but the moment you try to bring your mind to the involuntary breath falls away, and you start controlling the breath, right? That is a state everyone experiences, right? But then when the mind is subtle, when the mind is able to tap into that subtle way of cognition, you are able to now observe the involuntary breath without anything else, right? Without any sort of disturbance to the involuntary breath. The mind grows subtle, right? So try to relate it in that way to understand. But of course, know that this state of mind we have not experienced at this level. So even if we believe that this perception has fallen away, these are only examples that we are using. They are not comparable to what we are going to experience when we reach these kinds of states, right? When we are going to experience these kinds of states, right? All right. So that is the end of the immaterial consciousnesses. Immaterial consciousness, page number 65. Do we have any questions before we move on to? Yes, Samantha. Yes, Samantha.
Oh, yes, Bhante. I just wanted to, so when one goes through all these stages, I've heard like some monks, they are in a sort of state like this for like days and yeah, a couple of days, and they're not aware. I suppose you can't, you have no hearing during these states, so you're on your own basically, I suppose. And so when do they come out of it, and how do you know if you're like this for a day or two, so when do you come out of it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll be able to get up by time of dinner, isn't it, Samantha?
Just in case, Bhante.
Just in case, of course, you know.
You never know.
now, no. So how it happens is, how it happens, uh, it some now when we do develop these states, we also have a state called Nirodha Samapatti, where we are able to attain it to a maximum of 7 days, right? That is because, why the maximum of 7 days? Because the body needs sustenance, right? The body needs to sustain itself. The body needs to have a lot of energy for this practice. And because of that, we are only able to sort of develop it up until, 7 days. But there is also question of mastery. Now, by the time that you attain to these kinds of states, even with regards to the first, all the way from the first to the eighth jhana, that is from the material jhanas, fine material jhanas to the immaterial jhanas, there is a practice of mastery that happens. A practice of mastery. Now, in this practice of mastery, before you enter the jhana, you determine how long you You determine how long you want to be within the jhana. Now, for example, when we sometimes go to sleep, you tell yourself, I need to get up by 6 o'clock. And you find
Mm.
yourself waking up a minute to 6 sometimes,
Mm. Yeah.
before the alarm clock itself almost, and you are awake, right?
Mm.
In a similar way, in a very similar way, this determination, actually, that's a point of information. We must develop our minds, or that is a very basic thing to do. We must have that discipline of mind, right? So
Mm.
you will actually find, as you meditate, you will get that discipline, right?
Mm.
Where you
Mm.
can tell yourself, this is the time that I need to wake up, and you can wake up at that point. Now,
Mm.
in a similar way, before we go into a jhana, we determine how long we want to remain in the jhana. Now, it is said, now, if you're with regards to the 7 days, if you do not have a life expectancy of 7 days up to that moment, it is said that you will not be able to achieve the jhana. Now, let us say that your janaka kamma, or the energy of that you have to a love for life, the inner janaka kamma is, now, for example, if actually um, this was actually a question that my mother actually asked a monk, right? So of course, it was not a meditative question, it was regarding to black magic and all of these things. So my mother asked this monk who was into this sort of thing, that sort of a practice, where, why is it that we can't sort of curse, or, practice, or, do black magic towards someone like, for example, the leader of the LTTE? That was a question specifically, right?
Mm.
So Prabhakaran,
Mm.
right? Why is it that we can't sort of hex or curse, or, sort of spiritually kill Prabhakaran,
Mm.
whilst certain things of, black magic can be done to other people? And what this monk answered, and actually now knowing Dhamma, it does actually draw parallels with the Dhamma as well. When the Janaka Kamma is strong, now, for example, a Buddha cannot be killed. And we know through the stories that we've studied regarding the lifetime of the Buddha, regarding the life of the Buddha, we know that there were certain attempts on his life, but those attempts ended in the Buddha getting wounded, but not inflicting life-threatening damage to the Buddha. Why is this? Because people as powerful as this, now, for example, people in prominent places of power are in prominent places of power because of their strong karmic energy. They might be doing good, they might be doing bad, that does not matter, but they are carrying a powerful, what we call a janaka kamma, Janaka. We'll be discussing this in chapters to come, right? And when a person has a powerful janaka karma, whatever other people do, it does not affect you, right? It is as if a shield almost. Now, for example, I know within the Asian communities, actually even within spiritual communities, there are questions of how spiritual people can attack other people mentally, right? Now,
Mm.
this is specifically in the Brahmin traditions where you could spiritually attack other people. Now, but in the practice of Buddhism, in the practice that the Buddha has laid down for us, this doesn't seem possible, because the moment that we have a hindrance arising, our meditative developments fall, right? For example, that is a clear fact. We don't need any more examples. If, for example, if you're in a state of jhana absorption, your hindrances are suppressed. Let us think of a jhana, the first absorption, where your hindrances are suppressed, but not as suppressed as it would be in a fifth absorption. So then there is still room, right? We also call this hana, hana, bhagi, samadhi, right? Hana means can, hana means, um, the potential to be damaged. Hana, right? The potential that it has to be damaged. Now, for example, let us take, a cheap, something, cheap plastic or something, right? Let us take like a disposable food container, right? Now this one I can press, I can press it hard, right? But if I am to press a disposable container with that amount of hardness that I just pressed on this with, it will break for sure, right? And the first jhana is something of that sort. It can break easily because there is still, the hindrances are not yet suppressed to that fine level, right? So a beautiful man or a beautiful lady, or something that something sparkly that catches our eye, or something of that sort can arouse anger or lust, or one or more of the hindrances, which will then cause damage to the jhana. Then, so so that is why we go through a process. So this likewise, we have this jhana karma which cannot be affected, and with it, the this jhana karma. So when we are within that, we have to also develop our power. So as we progress along the jhanas, now I have digressed a bit, I've noticed, but as we develop our jhanas, the power that we have increases, right? The power that we have increases. This can signs. Now, how do we know that the power has increased? The sign of respect. When you tell your mind, be quiet, it is quiet. When you tell your mind, I'm going into samadhi, it goes into samadhi. It is like a disciplined, pet. You tell him to get up, it gets up. You tell him to sit down, it sits down. You're the driver now, right? That is a sign of this power that now you have in your mind. You can now, if a person is having an ailment or illness, you rub some oil on that person with some compassion, that person's illness goes away, right? Now these are ways, these are also reasons why, for example, in India, the river Ganges, right, which we refer to as the Ganga Nadi, right? People of the past, now if you go to place like is it Varanasi?
Yeah.
Varanasi,
Varnas.
isn't it?
Yeah.
The Ganga flows through Varanasi, but you can't bathe there. That is a cesspit, you know. But you still get people bathing there. But when you go to the higher sort of plateaus where Rishikesh, Gangotri, Yamunotri, beautiful places, beautiful places. When you go to places such as this, that water does have a sense of vibe to it, right? And why? Because the rishis, how that started was the rishis who were meditating hermits who lived in the higher plateaus of the Himalayan range. Now the Himalayan range is not all over, it's not ice all over, but there are places that you can live. There are places that you can live, and these rishis used to bathe in this water. And because the people believe that the water has been touched by the rishis, that is why they started bathing in it. And also because to sort of get the vibrations and the meditative energies and all of that of the rishis, because the rishis would also shower, or not shower, but rather bathe in the water with a sense of mindfulness, right? With mindfulness. So they believe that this water has been purified and touched. Also, they believe that Krishna, as a we call it a avatar. Um, what is the English word for avatar? Hmm. I want to say ghost, but ghost would be a bad word. A phantom. Okay, a phantom. I'm remembering Phantom of the Night. No, a phantom. Okay, we call it an avatar, oh yes, we can say a phantom, Phantom of the Opera, Phantom of the Opera. Right? Avatar is a sort of a spiritual entity of mind. Now, we know, if you have come into met people like monks like Venerable Venerable there is a Venerable Sri Lankan Venerable who resides in the Himalayas, and sometimes there are incidents. And also now in Rishikesh, or if you're into that sort of Rishi scene, the stories of Maha Rishi, incarnatio, is that the word, Veera? Is that the word?
Incarnation.
Incarnation.
Yeah.
Okay, but incarnation, is it how does that appear?
That's even Buddha is considered as
An
incarnation of
incarnation. But
yeah.
here it is actually like a deity who resides in the area.
Okay.
It is more like a deity, like the rishi has passed away, but he is still residing in the area in a higher form. Actually, that is what it is. That is what
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
He resides in the area with a higher form. And there are stories, and even this venerable, I forget his name, Jnana, he speaks of, because one time when he was in Kailash, Mount Kailash, right? When he was in Mount Kailash, the venerable, now Mount Kailash is very much high up, right? Now Mount Kailash is very much high up in the range. It's very much high up, very much secluded. That part of, and you don't have people living very close to. But so the venerable was residing in a cave in Mount Kailash, right? In the Mount Kailash region, right? Not in Mount Kailash itself, right? So in the Mount Kailash region, which can be very, that region can be very large. They have a lot of caves there, and you have a lot of caves. My gosh, you just go into one of these caves and your mind just empties out. Right now, I have not been to Mount Kailash, but I've been to caves like that in northern India. I remember, let me tell you a funny story. I was with a very good friend of mine at the time, and this was just a couple of miles from Rishikesh. So we were in Rishikesh, and now Rishikesh is a very hippie place. It is known as the doorway to the Himalayas, and Rishikesh. No, this is Ajanta Caves. Ajanta. This is more than Ajanta Caves, Samantha. This is more than Ajanta Caves. Ajanta Caves is very beautiful and all of that, but you cannot compare this to Ajanta Caves, right? Because, and let me tell you the story. And so this was a couple of miles in. So we hire a jeep, and the jeep takes us higher up into the mountains. And this cave was a very, very old cave, and my friend was really into photography, right? So he was trying to get me to take a photo. now I, now in his standards, I was absolutely shite in taking photographs. Right? So he wanted me to take a photograph, and he had this DSLR camera. So I was like, okay. So I took a photograph of him, and he was not at all happy. So I was like, I'm sorry, but I'm not so good at taking photographs, right? And then we had this. He got mad at me, and then he was shouting at me, and he was like, "You idiot! You can't take a proper photograph." Right? So he was quite so he was quite elder to me, so I couldn't sort of blast him back. And so I was like, okay. So obviously, so we got off the jeep and we were walking in. Now obviously, because he was shouting at me, I wasn't I was like, why are you just shouting? In my mind I wasn't speaking, but obviously he was like upset as well because I couldn't take a proper photograph. And so it was a very nice area. You come down from the road, and then you have the Ganga right there, right? You have to sort of walk maybe about 80 meters, right? And you have the Ganga right there, beautiful pristine green water and flowing. And there is sort of two large rocks that you sort of see the Ganga through. right? So it's like a narrow escape almost into the Ganga. And then you have this onto your right hand side, you have this large rock and sort of creepers and all of these vines sort of falling from the top of the rock. Beautiful, like an oasis, right? Obviously open air, open, the sunlight is coming onto you, yes. And then you have this cave, right? And you have this cave. And the cave had like these, because these are now tourist attractions, and Rishikesh is big business because there are so many foreigners who come there for yoga. And you have this sort of like the jail cells, in a way that they can close the gates and not let people go into the cave after a certain point of time. So the day gate was open, and of course I thought it was just another cave, so um, but it was a cave that one of the teachers of it was called Vashishta Guha. So Vashishta was a rishi who lived 5,000 years before the rising of the Buddha. 5,000 years. 5,000. The rising of the Buddha. Right. And so he was apparently one of the teachers and gurus of Hanuman, right? So that is how the story is, and he was a very, very sort of revered rishi. And so, of course, this was the first time that I was walking into such a cave, so I didn't really, it was just another cave. And the cave was such that, it would go, you would walk in and it turns. So the sunlight at one point, it disappears. Sunlight doesn't travel into the cave. And then you have not a narrow passage, but a passage, but quite narrow as well, narrow passage leading into the cave, which was one sort of oval-like cave, no sunlight, but there was a statue of, I think, Krishna with a candle, with one single candle lit. So it was lit. And I remember walking into the cave. And as we turn, now obviously the reason that I told you that I had a fight with we were arguing, that the friend and I were arguing, is because for you to understand the state of my mind at the moment. And the moment that we sort of turned and the sunlight disappeared, my mind went completely blank. Completely, absolutely pin drop silent blank, right? And it was as if there was a wind coming in from the cave almost. There was no wind, but wind will come in out from the cave. There was no wind, but you would feel that pulsating sort of vibe from the cave. Such a powerful experience. And the mind completely went blank. And then there were about 4 people inside the cave, 4 people inside the cave who were meditating. And I sat for some meditation, and my gosh, just not even a minute, it was like deep samadhi, right? The deep samadhi, not shallow, no, not any sort of half-ass samadhi. It was good deep samadhi. Right? It was good deep samadhi, and it was such an experience. And there are so many caves like that these rishis have meditated in. And because it is said, because of the lotus posture that these hermits meditate in, and also because of their diet, they don't eat much, and also they sustain a lot with the power of samadhi, they also are able to live longer, right? So it is apparently there are people who lived 400, 200 and more, even more years than that, but they live within deep samadhi with a lot of practice, and that sort of reflects on that energy. So this venerable from Sri Lanka was in a cave of that sort, right? I've digressed again from the story of that monk, but that was a fun digress. But so this monk was with an attendant, right? And they had run out of food. There was only the attendant, who I know, and I know this monk as well. The attendant told me that he only had one boiled egg, right? That one boiled egg that they had. Obviously, they finished up the food, and he only had one boiled egg. And boiled eggs, because with the freezing sort of, because it's cold, you can keep it, it's like a freezer. So you can keep it. So he was thinking, maybe I'll just give this to Bhante, because, and the Bhante was meditating. And somehow from somewhere, when he was thinking about food and how he's going to feed this monk, and now the attendant was there, hired by the devotees in Sri Lanka and by the family to take care of this monk, right? To take care of this monk. So he was particularly there to feed him, basically, right? During the right time. So he was also sort of agitated because now he's not able to sort of feed this monk because they have run out of food. And then from somewhere, and knowing the area and region, there is no way that, there is a group, there has been a man who had come with food, right? And given it to and gone into the cave and given it to this monk, right? And given it to this monk. And then this man had just disappeared, right? Now that is one story. Now another story that the same monk told me was, he was alone this time, right? This was before the trip that he made with this attendant. He was alone again in Kailash, where he had a thorn or something a snake had bit him, right? A snake had bit him, and his leg was fully swollen, right? A snake had bit him and his leg was fully swollen. Now also please, now this monk is a very sort of is a monk that this monk is a very sort of developed, is a very austere. He's not a monk who would create stories as well, just for your information, right? Because sometimes what we assume is, oh, must be a story. No, he's a proper practicing, proper monk with integrity and all of that. He would not make up these stories. So a snake had bit him and his leg was fully swollen and he was all alone and he had collapsed, right? He had collapsed, and now he relates this as a time that he almost died at Kailash. And it was after this that the parents hired this man, or got one of his devotees and paid him and all of that and sent him with this monk, because this monk could not stop going to Kailash. And then something that he had experienced was an old man had come and done something to his leg. Now this monk being semi-conscious, right? Just seeing this, you can understand semi-conscious, right? Just seeing the silhouette of this man coming and doing something, but being like under a bit, right? Coming and doing something to his leg, and he wakes up in the morning and the swelling has completely gone down, right? So there are many stories. It's not one or two of these stories. There are many stories of this sort with regards to people who meditate in Kailash, in Himalayas. And, there are so many books written about these stories and all of these things. And even to strong meditators, it is said Maharishi is one of them. Maharishi appears to many of these meditators and helps these meditators who meditate all around the range of the Himalayas. And so there is absolutely, I've been to some of these mountains, I've been to some of these places, and not all, but some of these places. And there is real energy in these places, real energy in these places. And I remember once when we have time, let's do the Lokotra Chittas the next time. So just some juicy stories for you. So another personal experience of mine is there was a Kali temple, a very revered Kali temple, up in the Himalayan range that I again visited with the same friend. It was during this trip that I visited with the same friend who wanted me to take photographs. So it was a very, very high mountain, very high mountain. I think just a little bit lesser than Adam's Peak. So you could imagine it was quite a high mountain, but there was a proper staircase to climb. And there was a there was a temple of Kali, one of the Hindu gods, on top. So obviously, we didn't know what this temple was. There was a group of people. We went early in the morning. There was a group of people who climbed together with us. There was no one. The temple was not even open, right? And so we just, the driver took us there, and we climbed. And we went together with this group of people, and they were climbing together with us. And as we reached the top, the sky was absolutely clear. The sky was absolutely clear, and as we reached the summit, the top of the mountain, right? The top of the mountain, it was not, such a high mountain to call it a summit, but the top of the mountain, there was the temple. It was a laid, there was marble tiles to sort of, which has flattened the ground. You could see the Himalaya, the Everest mountain from there as well, right? It was a very beautiful place. And then when we all reached there, so we were the first crowd to reach the top. um, and when we did, now there was no one there, there was no there was no Hindu priest or no one to do anything. As we reached the top, there was a dark rain cloud, a small one. It was not a large one, just the size of the sun, of the top of the mountain, just the size of the top of the mountain, or as it appeared to be, just the size at the top of the mountain. Actually, just the size of of the shrine. Actually, not even covering the whole summit of the mountain, the top of the mountain. And so I remember telling my friend, "Oh, I think it will rain." But what happened was, a woman got possessed, and she started, and this was one of the women who were climbing together with us, one of the pilgrims, so someone who had come from somewhere else, not a woman who was from there. And she got possessed, and then someone opened the doors of the shrine, and she was the one who sort of delivered the service. If you understand how a service in a Hindu temple happens, she's the one who delivered the service. Now, it was completely spontaneous. It was completely not planned at all, but there is an absolute vibe in that. You can feel like the meditation power. Even I remember when I was, now that is a Himalayan story. I remember a group of friends and we went to, with the workers and all of that, we went to Yala, the forest in Sri Lanka. Now, Yala, which is an elephant safari location now, right? And I lived quite close to Yala for a couple of months in a monastery called Nimalava, which had a lot of vibrations as well. And Yala is quite away from Nimalava. But in Yala, so what I would do is, of course, I would meditate in the morning and the evening. And the others, we were there for enjoyment, to go for the safari, to look at the elephants, and we had quite a good guide, and all of these things. We didn't go to meditate or anything like that, but I used to meditate in the morning and the night. And during the night, because now Yala, for those of you who know that part of the country, are places where arahants used to live, right? Those forests were places that arahants used to live, right? And a lot of arahants actually, with the animals, they used to live in the forest. And I remember when I was meditating in Yala, just doing my daily meditation, it was the vibrations that you hear when everyone has gone to sleep. I would still be meditating, and I would hear, like, imagine a bass drum. Imagine a bass drum being struck. And if you're near a bass drum, you can almost feel the vibration, isn't it, of the bass drum, because of the loud sound. A vibration as strong as that, sort of pulsating, sort of vibrating through the forest. We were in a cabin, which was sort of like we were sort of in a cabin which was built for the staffers of the safari. So we were in this house, and we slept in the balcony, because the balcony was open air, and it's quite hot in Yala. So we all slept on the balcony. We had beds in the balcony, which was a large sort of balcony, and we all slept outside, and you could hear the vibrations of the forest. You could hear the vibrations of these powerful meditative vibrations, which are still in the area. And my meditation, even there, was so good, so good. And these vibrations, if you all have been to the birthplace of the Buddha in India, Bodh Gaya, even there, however busy it is, now we know that there are thousands of people coming and chanting and doing their thing every single day, but you sit anywhere, you go into you are able to go into deep levels of samadhi, deep levels of samadhi. But let me tell you that the vibrations, or rather, Vashishta Guha was a completely different experience. There were no bass drums, there was nothing pulsating in that way, but it was just emptiness. It was surely Vashishta had gone into Arupa jhanas and all of these things. Also, another story is the story of Achan Chah, because we have just completed the Arupa jhanas, the immaterial jhanas, the story of Ajahn Chah when he was lying on his, when he was in hospital. To those of you who do not know, Ajahn Chah, to the latter of his life, he was paralyzed in a coma. And obviously the king, he was under the care of the king of Thailand, and he was in this hospital. Obviously should be the best hospital around. And he had this retinue of nurses who take care of him and all of that. And time to time, Achan Chah would or the because he was on all of these machines and all of that, the machines would go into a state where he's not breathing anymore, right? And the nurses would go into panic, and Achan Chah has died on our watch and all of that. And then the attendant monk would tell, no, he's not dead, he's just meditating, right? He's just meditating. So apparently after amount of time, the machine would start again with the breathing. So these meditative techniques, with the energy that you develop and all of this, it's very, very, very strong energy. Doing metta compassion practices with a jhana is absolutely amazing. Is absolutely amazing. The metta practice, even with a rupa jhana, the metta practice, I don't know of arupa jhanas, but with rupa jhanas, the metta practice that you would do, absolutely healing, right? Absolutely healing. And that is about, just imagine, my gosh, just imagine the power of an arahant. Just imagine the mental power of an arahant, right? Absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So just just some stories. We finished immaterial jhanas. We will continue the supramundane chittas next time. So just a bit of stories to inspire you. And I think you all should visit India and actually go into. I do not like southern India, like, no. Right. I do not like southern India. It gives me anxiety. But northern India, wow, that is a different experience. And to go into these places, and most of these places, now, for example, you get Rishikesh, there was so much of people who would come up to us to sell us weed. uh, right, there would be so much of foreigners, I mean white people, walking around high as a kite, right? high, as a, high as a kite. So it's Rishikesh. You don't really get these popular places that foreigners go into. You don't get that vibe as much. But when you go into now places like Badrinath, which is about 24-hour drive, oh, a horrible drive, let me add, a 24-hour drive from Rishikesh to Badrinath. But when you get to Badrinath, my God, right, the vibrations of the area, feel of the area is so much more. Is so much more. So anyway, so I think I urge you to travel to these places. It can give you so much of inspiration to continue your practice, and even spend a couple of days, just by the Ganga, meditating, to just have a feel of those vibrations. I think that is a good investment. That is a good investment to make. To those of you who do not want to go, or who dread a 24-hour journey, which I dread as well. There's a helicopter ride which takes you to Badrinath within 30 minutes. So that is very much an option as well. So page number. So does anyone have any questions before we wrap up the session? Yeah, page number 64, Dil. You can read it on your own. We have covered it is a very easy read. We have covered all the details. So page number 54, you can read it on your own. It's quite simple there. Also, with regards to whether we have to achieve or attain a jhana to be able to go into these states, you can now, I think you have an idea about how the jhanas can help us in the tikka panya, or the penetrative wisdom that we require to go into the subtle states of vipassana, right? So the jhanas can actually help us to go into the subtle states. But even if you do not want to go into these states, but rather prefer to practice vipassana on your own, by all means do so. By all means do so. But there will have to be very significant lifestyle changes that you will have to make in order to enable you to practice, enable you to suppress the hindrances in a way required or demanded by the vipassana practice. Right? That is the important part. But it is always healthy. It is always healthy to have a samatha practice, as we've spoken before, to have a bit of a samatha practice whilst you practice vipassana. It is always very healthy to have this. Also, the samatha practice, because of the aversion to happiness, elements such as zest and happiness, it gives a sense of inspiration. It brings a sense of lightness. It brings another attitude to the whole meditation as a whole, even in terms of the akasa kasina. The akasa kasina, I'm sorry, the light, not akasa, the light kasina, aloka kasina. The aloka kasina, the light kasina, is something that gives us a lot of strength in times of nibbana, in times of practicing vipassana and shuddha vipassana, right? Because shuddha vipassana can be quite bland sometimes. To be very honest with you, it can be quite bland sometimes, and you need a sort of a element to lighten it up. The lighter it is, the easier it is to continue the practice. So a lot of monks actually, they do practice the aloka kasina together with the vipassana practice as well. The light kasina with the vipassana practice, because the light kasina brings a sense of lightness, a light element into the mind. It brings a sense of arousing in a way that it arouses happiness, it arouses zest, it arouses a lot of good qualities, which enables one to endeavor on and thrive, right? So we will discuss those things in time to come. The we will go on to the sublime, or the lokottara chittas, so supramundane consciousnesses, next time in the next class. And for now, if we do not have any questions, I think we can wrap up the session. Lovely completing the Rupa jhanas. We've actually gone through it, and of course sharing these little stories, sharing these little stories, which is lovely, and also memories that I quite hold, very with a lot of happiness. So I think you all should also have the experience of traveling to this place and experiencing these experiences. So all the very best. I will see you all very soon again. Tomorrow is my off day, which I'm looking forward to. But I will see you on Saturday. And so the next talk, something else that I want to add is the next talk that I'm thinking that the next talk where we invite a guest should be on or within the light of overcoming difficulty in practice, because now we've gone through two science-based talks, and we've gone through the neuroscience talk, we've gone through the CBT talk, and I think it's good to now it's time to bring in a bit of difficulty and how dealing with difficulty. So difficulty in practice. So if you guys have any topic that you would like us to sort of focus on, please email. Let us know what you would like to listen to, what you think, and we will go with, the majority vote, right? So, and sort of try to find a person who would fit into that scope of discussion. Thank you very much. Have a lovely rest of the evening. I will see you all very soon. Take care and good night.